Hello, everyone, and good whatever moment of this day you are enjoying on your time zones. Welcome to day 10 of our first Hacking HR series of the year. It's always such a joy to open a conversation, and I was particularly looking forward to this 1 hour of talking about enhancing HR effectiveness with mindfulness and learning. My name is Minola Jacques. I will be your co host for the next hour. We have Jessa backstage taking good care of us. I already see comments coming in the chat. And please do keep them coming. At least let us know where you're watching us from or where you're listening to us from. It is our Hacking HR way of vicariously traveling around the world. We have an amazing lineup of speakers today. And while Jessa is helping me getting them on stage, I will just encourage everybody in the audience. Apologies, I know I still sound like Donald Duck. I'm recovering from a flu. But please do consider the comments and the chat your own conversation and whatever questions we are bringing up in our panel. Always drop your own stories and your own experiences. That is such an amazing way to keep the learning going and just support each other. Now, let's make the most out of our 1 hour today. I keep saying that hacking HR hours usually feel so much shorter than regular hours. And what I will do, I will pass the e-mic around as you appear on my screen. And the first bit is just shortly, kindly introduce yourselves. And then I was curious, I was reading the title of the panel, and I would ask you to share what was the first thing that came to your mind when you saw the title of this conversation. And Elizabeth, it's such a joy to see you again and being able to welcome you into our conversation.
Thank you, Manola. Okay, I hope I'm not too loud. Yeah, but it's exciting to be here. I'm always happy to be a part of any Hacking HR panel. Um, so Elizabeth is my name. I've been doing HR for about almost 20 years, and it was a progressive career, and then I set up a company that seeks to help founders and individuals kind of hack themselves into more productivity and performance. So my company is called TGL Labs, Thrive, Grow, Lead Labs. Yeah. So when I read this, um, the first thing that came to my mind is how apt, because there's no learning that can happen without mindfulness. Yeah, in a nutshell. And I'll pass the mic back to you.
Thank you so very much. And you stumbled upon a conversation, Candy, that I actually thought about. And we will definitely come in and talk more about what's the link between mindfulness and learning later on in our conversation. Renzi, our man from the future, good to see you.
Good to see you too, Minola. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Nice to meet you all, also, like panel members, and wherever you're joining from. Welcome. My name is Renzi. I am the managing director of Perky People. It's an HR consulting business. I work with clients in New Zealand, but also currently based in the UAE, actually Dubai. To your question, Minola, this is really interesting because when I was looking at the title, it gave me I basically had a flashback of you cannot be an effective HR if you're not mindful about what you do, but also if you don't have that ongoing learning mindset. Because as HR professionals, you really help like leaders, the people, to be effective and efficient within the organization, whether it's people practices or just to do things differently to engage and motivate people. So if you don't have that, then not being mindful about what you do, but more importantly, not being on top of day-to-day learning as HR, I don't think you can really say that you can be an effective HR without these two things.
Hmm. Thank you so much. Jess, good to see you. Welcome into this topic and conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. Hi, everyone. I'm Jess Goldberg. I teach leaders how to communicate with influence. I'm an executive coach, a leadership instructor, and I also teach at Columbia University. And when I first heard about this panel, the first thing that came to mind is really around how mindfulness is really about us building our muscle of awareness. And when we are aware, we can make more wise choices. And as HR professionals, we are thrown at so many different things, difficult people, difficult challenges, so many things happening at us that can put us into fight or flight. And so how can we increase our effectiveness? It's really about being able to downregulate our nervous systems and be able to make those wise choices.
Hmm. Thank you so very much. And last but not least, Mary, it's been a minute. It's
It
so
has
good to
been.
see you.
Very happy to be here. Happy Friday, everyone, from joining us here this morning. I'm Mary Garcia, the Director of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at Hagerty. Very excited about this topic. When I saw this, I was a little surprised in the sense that we don't really talk about this as much as we should. And, I really think about it from a mental health perspective, what we're seeing around employee engagement, and really around our employees' well-being. And, we talk about well-being, we talk about wellness, but, really to some of my other colleagues here, HR is thrown into the flux of things, and how we continue to evolve and grow and support other employees is equally important, right? And so I am just excited that we are talking about it. We've named it, and now we're just going to unpack it. And so thank you all, Hacking HR, for elevating this really, really important topic.
Thank you. Thank you all so very much. And before we dive very, very deep into the topic, I would love to hear from all of you a little bit around how does mindfulness show up in workplace? And equally, how do you see not being mindful coming up in your interactions? And what I will do, I will just leave the question there, and we will consider this round as the unmuting trial. And let's see who wants to dive in.
Okay, I'll have a go. I think your first question about how does mindfulness show up in the workplace, I think that's the biggest challenge at the moment. Because as much as, at least when I deal with senior leaders or even just like general employees, I don't know about the other parts of the world, but at least here in the Middle East, there's this terrible habit of like running on their hamstring wheel, like day in, day out, that like everything's important. Like you cannot drop everything because everyone's like so busy. Everyone is putting forward their suggestion and requesting like I think I need this done ASAP. So the concept of mindfulness, to a certain extent, at least where I operate, is almost non-existent unless you have an HR department who are strong enough to somehow integrate that practice of being mindful about what's happening in the workplace, whether being mindful about how you speak, being mindful about how you treat your people, being mindful about yourself so that you avoid burnout. So a lot of these things, somehow it's still quite new or still requires a lot of support from a seasoned or like maybe experienced HR professionals, or maybe not even seasoned or experienced. It could be like HR professionals who are passionate about the topic and willing to drive this in their organization. So your second question is when is it not? Repeat the second question, please, Minola. When is it not?
How does not being mindful look like and sound like and feel like in organizations?
Yeah. So when it's not being mindful is exactly what I have described in a workplace where you see high turnover, high burnout rate, but people don't realize these things happen because they think like, oh, like this is a highly pressurized environment. Oh, like they don't take no for an answer. Oh no, this and that. And you see a lot of people leaving the organization. It's because people don't care about people. They only care about you deliver 8 hours a day, you work. So I think that's extreme, but I have seen it.
Thank you. Elizabeth, I saw you unmuting yourself a couple of times, please.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll just go into talking, it's too easy for us to be reactive as human beings in the workplace. You're working with different people. situations get thrown at you, and if you are not mindful, which is self-regulating and practicing your emotional intelligence, it will be too easy for you to react based on the actions of other people or the situation happening around you. And we are in VUCA times. You could say VUCA, BANI, whatever. It's just uncertain times that change too frequently. If we do not practice or have mindfulness at play in the organization or with more people than we see now, we would be reacting, and it's not sustainable. So let's paint a picture of leadership in a business. So imagine if we don't have any role that's consciously trying to drive mindfulness in the business or leading mindfully. We would have leadership that's reacting to every single thing. And as things change, that's how we'll change. So if we don't consciously imbibe mindfulness in the business, or we don't have anybody thinking about it, we would have, just the helter-skelter behavior.
Mm.
I think the only thing I would add to this conversation is, when mindfulness is being practiced and it's done well, you're going to see that in the collaboration amongst employees and how they get their work done, which is naturally going to be, you're going to naturally see this higher level of productivity as just a byproduct of that, right? When it's not in existence, or mindfulness isn't there, you're going to see a greater degree of, like burnout, which our colleagues have said. You'll see that even as people are pivoting and trying to be as agile as they can with how the business demands are, you're going to see higher levels of stress and how they're reacting to it, to your point. And so all of those pieces really then show up in your engagement scores, in your retention numbers, and even probably some of their performance. And so all of those different things really kind of give like this ecosystem that can be, what we always hear about, like a toxic work culture, right? There's something kind of festering and kind of brewing. But when your mindfulness is really attached to it, or you are having a self-awareness around these pieces, and you're willing to learn, because you can be mindful, but if you're not open to learn and to even do better as oneself, you're just going to be keeping to repeat the cycle. And so I think it shows up in a lot of different ways. I think it's also a new lens people are having to look through that they haven't before. And so I think that is part of the newness as well that might be difficult.
Mm.
Yeah, and I want to add that in every single moment, there's an opportunity to be mindful. So we can be not mindful the entire day, have, a lot of stress and anxiety going on. And then there's an opportunity for a choice point where we can choose, in this moment right now, I'm going to be mindful instead. I'm going to be aware of the present moment, what is happening, and make more active choices. I'm going to downregulate my nervous system, and I'm going to choose to act differently. I'm going to choose, instead of responding out of a place of fear or a place of anxiety, I'm going to respond from a place of clarity and wisdom. And so there's an opportunity for that to happen in every single moment. And you wanted to know a little bit about, what does it look like when we're not mindful? Well, science shows that there's a concept called mirror neurons. And mirror neurons means that essentially when I am anxious and stressed, especially if I'm in a position of power, those around me and my employees will be anxious and stressed as well. And so as an HR leader, you get to showcase how you want your organization to show up. If you want your employees to be more grounded, make wiser choices, treat each other better, it starts with how you show up, because your energy, the way that you show up, will impact them. And that's really critical.
Minola, if you will allow me, I think Elizabeth mentioned something really important also just there about self-regulation, awareness. I think also as HR professionals, when we talk about mindfulness, it is awareness, but I like what you said there, Jess, but it's also choosing to do something about it, because it's not enough to be aware. As HR professionals, we are, I think, bombarded with all types of psychometrics to understand who we are as HR professionals, we love assessments, engagement to understand what's happening. So it impedes our effectiveness if it stops to awareness and we don't choose to do anything or do things differently.
I am so happy that you popped back into the conversation, Renzi, because you read my mind. I was going to ask, what is the HR flavor for mindfulness? But before we start answering that, I just want to acknowledge to Anna, Catherine, and Nikki that I did see your suggestions for questions, and we will bring those in as we move forward. And also, I saw that already people are asking whether this conversation is being recorded, and great news, it is. And you can always go back and check what you missed, or even re-listen or recommend it, either through our LinkedIn space or hackinghrlab.io. So what is the HR flavor for mindfulness? And I would ask Mary to lead us into this, and then everybody else, please consider the unmuting competition officially open and just pop up and build your conversation. So Mary.
So I think in some ways there is this element of mindfulness that is kind of coming into the conversation in HR. I think we've just categorized that differently and we've called it different names. I think about some of the leadership competencies or learning competencies we want to see within our employees, and part of like awareness and having mindfulness and empathy all kind of belong in some ways to some of the same kind of family. But I think there is an opportunity for us to look at that and really change the conversation now with this widely distributed remote workforce that we're kind of looking at. And I think we forget that what mindfulness looked like a couple of years ago looks very different now. And sometimes we're not adjusting that. And I think within HR, we have to adjust some of those expectations. We have to kind of challenge ourselves about how and why we're doing things, and then making those adjustments. Because I find some organizations are still seeing this remote distributed work as a part-time thing, or we're going to go back to the office, or there is a lot of movement to go back to the office. And where this mindfulness shows up, and looking at that is the stress. Where is that going to impact the well-being? How do we impact the policies, procedures that we have? And are we willing to make those investments to really elevate this conversation within HR and then make some real concrete decisions around that? I think it's a big discussion. I don't think we talk about it enough, but I think there's so many other competing things that we're looking at within HR. Sometimes we're not as able to focus in on it as much as we should, but I think conversations like this really remind us of how important that is.
If I can just jump in here. So Mary just struck a chord, because if there ever was a role in any business that's responsible for guiding the business through being mindful, if a business was a person, an entity, it would be the HR role. But the last thing she said is there are too many competing priorities. We get distracted by things that should happen, but being mindful and using that to guide how the business learns in terms of how you get the best people to be and stay, to join and stay your business, is embedded in the foundation of driving mindfulness. So if we were to more consciously take our role as the guiding force, the guiding light of business improvement, we would be more mindful, because as human beings ourselves, you don't become a robot just because you're in HR. You have feelings. And if I were to paraphrase what mindfulness means to me, it's just being present in the moment and making the right choice. So how do you do that for yourself? And how do you guide a business to do that? Starting from the leaders, because if you get all your leaders to do that, then your entire business will, the ripple effects will go through your business and your culture. So, yeah.
One of the benefits of mindfulness is that you are able to see your own thoughts clearly. You're able to recognize what stories are your own and what stories are things that society has told you. As HR professionals, we have to be really critical in thinking about equity and inclusion. And so often we have these stories that society has told us that are not our own, that are not about being connected as humans. And so when we are more mindful, we are able to understand when we are reacting out of bias, when we are reacting out of fear, when we are reacting out of systems and the way in which the world has told us that we need to be versus the way in which we want to show up as individuals, the world do we want to create. And so when we are more mindful, we can create a better world because we get to make those active choices.
And just to add to what the panel is also saying, I think like the flavor that I would add as an HR professional, number one is setting boundaries, and number two, being respectful of that time off, which means break time as an HR person, lead the way. If you are promoting well-being, if you're promoting work-life balance, if they see you as an HR person who's having meeting from 9 to 5 o'clock without a break, then you yourself are saying something to your employees. This is how we should be functioning, and this is how we should be working. So without being mindful about what we do as HR professionals, this has a profound impact on how the others also operate in the business. Setting boundaries, accepting work on weekends, on during your holiday, when you're sick, it's okay. I'm not generalizing things, but at least where I operate, to a certain extent, some organizations accepted like as if like they're proud that like, hey, yeah, but we need to do this because like this has to be done. So it doesn't matter if I am in a hospital or on holiday and whatnot. So as HR professionals, I think we need to look at these two things, like setting boundaries so that others also in the organization set the right boundaries, define what boundaries mean and what's a healthy boundary. And then the second one is be respectful about your personal time, the time where you can have lunch, the time where you can have a break during the day.
This is absolutely amazing, and I see that your insights really do resonate with people in the audience. And I want to keep myself honest to a promise I made very, very early on, and that is tying mindfulness to learning. And Elizabeth, since you mentioned that very early into our time together here today, I would invite you to be the pioneer for this slice of our conversation. So mindfulness and learning, what's the connection?
Oh, this is a very interesting one because I actually think about this quite a bit. So, when you know something, I say this sometimes because this is what I think. If you actually know something, you'll be driven to act. If you are mindful, then it's easier for you to develop a growth mindset. And that is what learning and the development that happens with learning is based on. You don't learn or change because when you learn, then there's something in you that changes, you evolve without a mindset that allows you to do that. Otherwise, you're just gathering information. And the more information you gather in these times, the more negative you could be, because there's a lot of information that could make you become cynical if you are not being conscious about what you do with what you know. So for me, mindfulness is a very huge part of how we absorb the information that converts into action, which is that helps us learn and become better versions of ourselves, either intentionally or just by chance. That's how I think about it. Yeah.
I'll go. I think about two things here when you talk about like mindfulness and learning. The first part for me is when we are mindful, every interaction, every experience that we go through in life, whether personal and work, is an opportunity to learn. So this is the concept of growth mindset as well. Because when you practice, when you have that growth mindset, somehow you're practicing that mindfulness because you're open to learning new things. The second part for me here is by being mindful, you are intentional about what you want to learn. Because what I've seen sometimes, at least after interacting with different HR professionals, sometimes they themselves, they go into a training program because it's hot, because it's nice, because a lot of people are doing it without being intentional. Why do I want to learn this? How is this going to add value to what I do now, and how is this going to add value or align in my future goal? So it's the being mindful about why you want to do things in order for you to learn, because you will get the maximum learning from everything if you chose to be there because you want to get A, B, C, D, E, F, G outcome by attending that program.
Mm.
When I think about mindfulness and learning, I kind of think of it in a couple of different ways. You know, for me, it shows up in the sense of like cognition and concentration. You know, like if you have learned mindfulness and you're training in that way, then you're able to really concentrate and be less distracted, and how you choose to work and maneuver your day just becomes a little bit more productive in that sense, because you are practicing mindfulness. There is this awareness. But then it also comes back to like some social and emotional learning. When you have that mindfulness and you've applied that learning, it's going to give you a greater awareness of like the relationships that you're managing at work, how you manage them, and really give you a better and almost richer understanding of those different things around working relationships. You know, there's been times where we have to work with people and some folks are difficult, or maybe the styles are just different, or maybe, I think about like the DISC assessment, if you're a D and you're working with an S, like it's so different. But when you are being mindful of others, then you're able to apply that in those working relationships. And then that's going to have a direct reflection on behavior. You're able to self-regulate more effectively and manage being reactive or impulsive. And then that will in turn help reduce some of the conflict or any combative nature that could be in a conversation, whether it's HR with employees or just trying to get some group work done, right? And all of that really feeds into showing how that mindfulness shows up through your learning and then how it's applied in the day-to-day. But to do that and having that constant back to those competing factors, it gets tough. It really gets tough. And I think that's the human part of, HR jobs. There's a lot going on, and HR looks very different today than what it did 5 years ago. What we're worrying about and what we're trying to solve for in the future and now, completely different. But I am happy about the conversation that we're having around mindfulness, learning, empathy, well-being, wellness. These are things that we didn't really talk about this heavily like we are today. So I think that is a testament to the HR too, to kind of turn things around, have these conversations. And so there's a lot of different intersections there, but that's kind of the things that I think about when I look at this.
Jess.
Yes, I love what you're saying, Mary. I agree with so much of what you're talking about there being kind of two different ways that I also think about how mindfulness can impact learning. The first is similar to what you were saying, Mary, that it helps us build our muscle of attention. If we are practicing meditation, which is a way to build up our muscle of mindfulness, that's one path. There are other paths as well, but that's one path to build up that muscle of attention and mindfulness. If we are practicing that, we get to practice attention, which is really good for if we're doing trainings, when we're doing, seminars, when we're actively learning, even when you guys are here in this panel presentation right now. By being able to listen actively to what we're saying, being able to take it in, you're in some ways practicing some element of mindfulness. And so that's going to help you, the more present that you are, be able to soak in the learnings from today. But then there's the other element of mindfulness. which is in every moment and in every day. And what I see it as not just learning opportunities and as someone's actively teaching you something, but it's an opportunity for you to look at how you're operating. It's an opportunity for you to understand how other people are responding to you. Maybe if someone's responding to you somewhat sharply, there's an opportunity for you to learn what about your attitude, what about the way that you're showing up might be causing them to act in that way. And so this opportunity of mindfulness as HR leaders allows us to learn about our own strengths, where do we want to double down, and our own weaknesses, which can be really, really hard to look at if we have not cultivated this ability to downregulate our nervous system, because our nature as humans is to get defensive, to try and self-protect. And if we can work on, downregulating ourselves, we can actually see our weaknesses more as opportunities for growth, and with an element of compassion and with an ability to actually change.
This is just so wonderful. And we are now officially entering the second half of our conversation. And as I was listening to all of you, we started scratching a little bit on the skills that underpin being mindful. So also building on something that, let me check my notes, that Catherine dropped in comments quite early in our panel today. She said that she senses an undertone of resilience being embedded in mindfulness. So I would really invite you just take a few minutes of our time and let's look at the skills and capabilities that underpin mindfulness in the workplace. And by now, you know me, I have extra points for skills that are outside of the circle of usual suspects. So anything that we wouldn't necessarily naturally link to being mindful. And let's see who wants to lead us into this. Jess, would you like to go first?
Because jump in and begin. So some of the skills that, we've already been talking about: attention and awareness and compassion, being able to be compassionate to ourselves, kind to ourselves, even when we make mistakes. We're thrown at so many different challenging issues, and it can be overwhelming to deal with all the different personalities and conflicts that we're dealing with as HR professionals. So being able to have compassion for ourselves, and then being able to have compassion for others. Sometimes we might have someone coming to us, talking to us about another employee and how they operated and their negative behavior. And when we are mindful, we're able to see with compassion that other person, the other person who's on the other side of us, who may have operated not in the best way. Maybe they said something that was really horrible, but can we see them and their whole humanness, all of the spectrums of who they are, their insecurities, their fears, their pains, and can we see them as a whole human? And mindfulness really allows us to have more of that capability to not just quickly judge someone for something that they did, but to see them as a whole human instead. And that's a really important skill that mindfulness allows us to do.
That's a really, really nice set of skills, Jess. If I may add also, I think this is just just some of it. Like, for example, emotional intelligence. We've been talking about regulation. We've been talking about self-awareness. But to repackage all of this is also like part of that emotional intelligence realm is also self-direction, which is your purpose, understanding why you do what you do as an individual. Sometimes maybe it's better for us to question something, maybe because the reason why we're not effective in what we do and we just keep doing what we're doing in spite of the heightened awareness of what we do. It could be that we don't really want to be in HR. Maybe we just want it because of, I don't know, like the perks, the company and whatnot. So this is also the other aspect of mindfulness, is being mindful about why do we do what we do, which is the purpose. And then I'm thinking also about like stress management. Mindfulness is mainly used around self-regulation, being aware, being present in the moment, so that you are focused on making the right decision, treating people nicely, and maybe responding more positively regardless of whatever's happening in the situation. So stress management is also a critical skill when you talk about mindfulness. So what are these different things that you can do to self-regulate, to increase your self-awareness, but also hopefully deepen your understanding about why you do what you do? The third thing I would like to add is maybe around communication. So being mindful is also knowing how to express yourself, and maybe regardless of the situation, maybe it's a heated argument, or maybe it's not a very nice circumstance where you're in a board meeting, or maybe just in a random meeting room. It's how do you communicate your frustration, your anger productively, so that it doesn't escalate, but also allows other people maybe to express their point of view, and still be able to respect each other.
So I think one of the skills I think about is when we are, we've had a lot of conversation around mindfulness and self-awareness, and, having some more empathy when we have these conversations. When I think of mindfulness, I really think about how it can help reduce implicit bias and some of like the prejudice that we see that shows up because we are paying attention in that present moment. It can be a really effective self-care strategy to support both like emotional or even sometimes physical health. But if we are really clear about maybe our bias in some of the things of how we're reacting, and I think about the example she shared about if someone was sharp with you, or maybe they were a little combative, or even if that's you doing that, like it makes you kind of check yourself and see, am I showing up with some level of bias here? Am I being as mindful? And that's a really hard conversation I find people have. I think we all believe we are great people individually, but we do have bias. We're human. But the process of looking within ourselves and saying, where am my bias? And where has that been showing up? Sometimes we discover that we didn't even know we were biased in this way, like let's pick on confirmation bias, right? We just thought this is how I've been trained, or I was learned to do these things. And that really can be a difficult time when you're seeing leaders or even just individual contributors realizing that bias within themselves. And what I see is people are either willing to look within themselves and make those changes, or kind of unpack what does that mean, how is that impacted, or they will completely look the other way and be embarrassed maybe that they did have bias, that they are still practicing it, and they're not intentional about it, right? But now that they know, what are people doing differently to change that behavior? And that's really hard work. And it is really hard to look within oneself and then realize perhaps some negative impact your bias might have had in the workplace, whether it's decisions or process or policy, and then going back to really actively work on it while you've got these competing factors, right? And so mindfulness, I think, helps us really reduce some of that unconscious bias, really grow in that way, and then create a better environment for others to truly show up as their whole selves.
Oh, amazing. So if I connect the dots that I'm hearing, because half the time I'm sitting here learning as well. And one of the biggest things that I'm thinking with all the things that mindfulness helps us do is there's a skill that underlies everything, which is the courage to even act. As a result of the reflections, the self-awareness, the knowledge that you gain from how your actions have inspired other people to act or respond, and the changes that you want to make within your mindfulness. The positivity is also another skill, is being positive in and generous. I think generosity is a skill, but the courage to deliver the inspired action as a result of all of this, turning the mirror on yourself, the reflection, the clarity that you get, considering the intersections of how we behave, how we connect, self-regulating, everything is, it might require you to do something different than your default. If you have the courage, then your mindfulness would have an outcome.
I feel that this topic alone could have its own series and not just a 1 hour conversation. And we will be about 20 minutes away from wrapping this one up. So I was looking at the title of this panel, and there's one word that just sticks out to me, and that's effectiveness. And everything that we talked about, mindfulness and learning, I am very mindful of the fact that there are still organizations where this conversation is very separate from the conversation about effectiveness and delivering on business results. I'm also picking up on something that Anna said again in comments a while back. How can we recognize blockers to mindfulness in organizations, and how do we go past them? That is one. And then Nikki also raised a point. Who and where should the conversation about mindfulness be started and pioneered in an organization? Long story short, my next question to all of you is, how can we bridge these two worlds, effectiveness and mindfulness? And who does what when building this bridge?
Well, one of my favorite sayings is that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And I think so many organizations, they rush to want to move fast. They want to build bigger. They want to go faster. They want to get more money. And what you miss in just simply going for fast first is you miss building a organization that is going to be set up for long-term success. You miss building employees that are going to be engaged, that are going to want to stick around and continue to build the company. If you burn them out too soon, you're not going to have them in the long term. So really what I think about when I think about effectiveness, how do we link mindfulness to effectiveness, is we talk about long-term strategy. We don't talk about short-term strategy, we talk about long-term strategy. Because long-term strategy, it's something that compounds over time. If we're mindful every single day, we're going to make better choices every single day as leaders. We're going to make everyone feel better in the organization. And that is going to build over time. It's not going to change overnight. But I think the conversation and effectiveness is really around how do we build a long-term strategy that's sustainable for this company. And that is where I think you can have more leverage in having that conversation, is by talking about the long-term strategy.
You said it beautifully, Jess. I like what you said about like a slow is smooth and smooth is what was that?
Fast.
Like smooth is like fast. Because I cannot agree with you more. Where a lot of business leaders, they tend to like ask what was done yesterday, and or maybe in the previous years. Like the point is they want something done ASAP, ignoring the fact sometimes that to do something requires time and requires people to step back, rethink about, okay, does this make sense? What's the best way to approach the situation? And if you are not mindful as an HR professional, you are also gonna encourage people to keep doing that. So I like what you said about like putting in place a strategy. I would add on to that, it's maybe not just a strategy, maybe to a certain extent, think about what kind of culture do you want? And as an HR professional, you really have to put it out there with the board members or your C-suite. And so like, okay, fine. Because as business leaders, if this is what they want, and it's fine. There are organizations who would just bluntly tell you, this is how we operate. You cannot change us. All we want to do is make money. Then it's a question of, do I want to work in this kind of organization? Because to change the mindset of those people who are, in a way, like they're thinking set in stone, like, oh, this is how we operate, that's fine. It's your choice to either change and do whatever, but at least from experience, it's better to work with people who believe that to get things done, you need to work with people, not robots. Because with how organizations want to work fast, they sometimes treat people as robots, that they can produce something like 20 pairs of something in 1 hour, that kind of thing. So I think as HR professionals, to gap, really look into your ways of working within the organization. Is this aligned with what your C-suite thinks about the kind of culture you want to build for the organization? Because if it's not, show them where the gaps are, get them on board, and then create that strategy, that roadmap of what would that look like in order for us to change the current picture to achieve and get to where we want to be, where people are more mindful, where experimentation is acceptable, where failures are acceptable, etc., etc. Because these are all part of the package of being mindful as well.
When I think about this, I often, when we think about HR, sometimes HR, we can get labeled as like the soft part of the business, right? And I think when we talk about mindfulness and how it shows up to the business and how that impacts some of, the effectiveness or productivity, you have to flip the script and talk about the positive impact of what mindfulness can do to the business in the number sense. Build that business case around productivity, creativity, innovation, around when our people are having that balance, when they are practicing this mindfulness, show that direct correlation to the positive impact it can have to the business, to the bottom line, to the numbers. We have to kind of switch channels into how we talk about this with our leaders and how it drives some of our business. And so I think too often we stay in that HR language, and we need to kind of shift it differently to talk about that. And then from there, I think we'll open up a different conversation around how we're going to do this and what are those different things. And so that would be my probably recommendation. And it's the hardest thing to do, right? You've got to quantify certain aspects. And it's, I think about D&I, we've been building that case, trying to talk about that forever, about how much that increases innovation and all those other wonderful things. It's the same thing with mindfulness. We have to talk about it differently because we are in different times. But if we can tie those together and show the numbers in the business case for how it's a positive factor into driving the company, then I think we can have a more frank discussion about the impact that it's not having and what we're going to do in a short-term and long-term kind of point of view.
Absolutely. So it's also, just to add everything as I'm absorbing, is what do we model as HR? I think Renzi mentioned something about that. What do we model? If we wanted to show the business that mindfulness was going to drive the strategy, and we wanted to build a culture that's more mindful, what do we model? Do we show the business that we're mindful of the business and therefore learning about the business and making the learning impact on the way we do our work so that we're more effective? So it's about what do we know about the business? How much of the conversion to the bottom line that the business is interested in? Do all these things we're talking about? Because at the end of the day, we might just reduce it to the understanding of the rest of the business. Who's driving business development, growth in numbers? We'll listen and say, oh yes, they've come with this term, mindfulness. It's another word. Yeah, but if we demonstrate at each point that we are practicing being intentional about how we learn about the business and the changes, that the only role that can make the impact is the HR role, and how it ties back to the bottom line, then we would be demonstrating effectiveness in our role and therefore modeling a culture of increased mindfulness and learning.
I have a two-layer agenda for my next question. One, and I will be completely honest about it, is sheer personal curiosity. But the other one is also a and wholehearted intention to leave the audience with something actionable. So I am curious, after listening to all of you, what are some of the things that you do to stay mindful, especially on days when everything has to happen right now, if not 3 minutes ago? And Renzi, since you brought up this sense of urgency and quite oftentimes overused and misused, I would invite you to be the first one to go. So how do you stay mindful?
Two things that has been helping me a lot, I think, since like I was hospitalized because of like too much stress in the workplace, and I didn't know what stress was doing to me. And then from then on, like a good friend of mine told me, like, you know what, you need to block a time on your calendar where you can actually be doing something, whether for yourself or just really look at what's happening. So ever since that day happened, I always block an hour or two every day on my calendar where I don't use it for any meeting. It's just for me to reassess where am I, what's happening. Am I still doing what I'm supposed to be doing for the day, or am I doing things that will create the maximum impact because these are the ones that deliver value to whoever I'm working with? That's one. The second one that has been helping me a lot, because I am naturally creative and have so much ideas that are, like jumping out of my head every single day. So what has been helping me is make notes either on my phone, on the digital post-it notes. I just make notes of ideas or anything that I want to do, or even the plan for the following day. I just want to know, like, especially on busy days, I don't do this every day, but like, especially when things get very, very hectic. So I write down, like, what are the things that I need to do, and then start prioritizing them. Okay, tomorrow I'm going to be doing this. Next week, I'm going to be doing this, because it's a lot easier for me to process things when I can visually see them. Now, this has worked for me. Great if this is going to work to our audience, but my suggestion is find what will work for you. There's a lot of self-help book there who will tell you do this, do that, do that. And sometimes they're not easy to follow. Yes, it's all about building habits, but find what is most helpful for you. If you need to customize some of these tips, customize it, because you don't want to just copy paste something. You are unique, you are different, and I'm sure you will respond differently to different things.
Thank you, Renzi. Elizabeth.
Yeah, so there's something I've started doing recently, and that is my day has time boxes. So there are certain hours in the day that there are certain things that can't happen. I have periods where I block out. If anybody's going to book out a meeting with me, that's the only available time that I can have meetings with other human beings. Then I have time boxes for when I have to do deep work. Then there's just a time box that's blank. That's for de-stressing. And because I know that sometimes the lines blur, the time box that's for, me time, I wouldn't allow, if anything needs to cross in, it shouldn't be interaction, because I need my time. It shouldn't be interaction with anybody else. When I started doing that, it was like, yeah. And then the other thing is when I find that I'm being overloaded with things that that I'm responsible for in a short time, I just have to find the time to turn everything off and be quiet. So right before this panel started, there were so many things that needed to happen that I was doing. So going from one meeting, going to another thing, there's something, and I'm like, okay, 30 minutes before, I need to be sat and in silence and just calmly project myself into the next thing I'm supposed to do with breathing exercises and all of that. But it's having the time, creating time boxes is a game changer that I implemented. Yeah.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
I'll go next real quick. For me, I do something on a weekly basis. I'm one of those people that just love a Sunday. It's the start of the week. It's a chance to, do something different, make it better from the last week. And so every Sunday, from a work and personal sense, I just assess the week. What's on my schedule? What's a priority? What didn't get done last week? How is my team doing? Are there other teams that I work with? What were some of the challenges? And I really look at the week to see how I can be more effective and mindful about what we've got to get done for that week. And, I make it a regular part of like our team meetings. We talk about, what's working, what's not. And it's not just to ask, we really unpack some of that. And then on Friday, I like to call it where I'm closing out the week. So I close out the week by looking at what got done, what didn't get done, what are we proud of this week, what was hard, what was difficult, not only just maybe a project, a meeting, but was there a working relationship that just didn't go really well this week? And, what role did I play? And how could I, maybe enhance that differently? Not everyone does it. It's not for everyone, but it's worked for me. And I'm able to then look at that and then make any adjustments I might need to for the next week. So 2 days later on Sunday, when I'm looking at the week ahead, I look at my list and thoughts from what I looked at on Friday and make any adjustments. And, it takes time to kind of build that out a little bit, but I find that it allows me to be a little bit more present. It allows me to create some more balance. I even look at my calendar and see, if this next week I have a bunch of ERG leadership meetings, or there are a bunch of, HR meetings. I look at what my workload is and see if there's any triggers with those different work groups that I might need to be mindful of, so that I can really come into the conversation a little bit different. Some weeks are easier than others. Some weeks are just hard, but I am mindful of that. And I always try to do some self-reflection on how I might show up differently, or, is there something I need to look at and work on within myself? Not easy things to do, but those are some of the things I practice.
Thank you so much, Mary. Jess.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are 3 tools that I like to use to cultivate mindfulness in the present moment. These can all take you less than a minute to do. The first is just breath. So if I have a meeting that I'm really nervous about, maybe I have to give hard feedback to someone, what I do is I simply just, breathe in, noticing the sensation of the breath as it comes in, and then letting it go. And just doing 3 simple breaths like that, and as deep as you can help downregulate your nervous system. Now, some people don't like breath, and it doesn't work for them. So I'm going to give you 2 other tools that I really like as well. The second is touch. And so what I'll do is I'll take my 2 fingers together, and it might seem a little bit silly, but you rub your fingers together as slow as possible until you can start to focus your attention on what it feels like for those 2 fingers to be rubbing together. And what it's doing is it's basically moving your attention away from your anxiety, concerns, whatever's going on, and it's bringing your attention to the present moment. The third one is sight. So I'll just pick something within my sight. Maybe it's a tree outside, and I'll just look at the texture, the color of it. And all I'm doing is bringing my attention to something outside of me, because so often we have to go into these meetings that are stressful, things that are going on, and we just need to bring our mind to the present moment and downregulate ourselves. And that allows us to naturally be more mindful, to make the wiser choices. If you have more time, I say do a meditation. And I can throw in the chat, I have a free meditation for HR professionals too, if you want that. So I will send that out.
Wonderful. It is literally painful to say that we are at the end of our conversation. I just want to make sure that there's a little bit of a buffer for the next panel, just for Jessa and everybody in the audience who rolls over to get a glass of water and maybe just look at a tree or do a little bit of breathing. Now, as a wrap up, which is the punchline round of answers, I am curious whether you have either a word that can serve audience as an anchoring inspiration, or if you have a mantra, something that you go to ground yourself. And what I will do, we will just Clockwise, as we started, I will give all of you a few extra seconds to think about this. My mantra is be present over perfect. And I say this to myself whenever I feel like, okay, I do need to, reboot from CD. Probably that's a joke for just certain generations. But thank you, everybody in the audience, for being here. Elizabeth.
For me, it's never as hard as you've imagined it. That's what
Thank
I
you.
say.
Thank you so much. Renzi.
For me, I like this quote from Oprah. She said, like, always start your interaction with a clarity of intention, for it will influence, how you react, but also will determine the outcome of that interaction.
Thank you. Clarity of intention. Wonderful. Mary.
Very similar to yours. I always go in with just assume good intention, so that nothing else creeps in that probably shouldn't be in there. And so I like to start with that.
Thank you so much. And Jess.
My favorite is from Joseph Goldstein. It's begin again. That every opportunity we have to begin again, even if we've made a mistake, even if we didn't like how we showed up, we get to begin again.
Begin again. Wonderful. Thank you, Elizabeth, Renzi, Mary, and Jess. Thank you, Jessa and Enrique, for making this possible. And thank you, everybody in the audience, for being here. Thank you, and stay tuned for an amazing treat, and it will be navigating HR complexities with confidence. See you all very soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Good morning, and today, my name's Rod Hutchings. I'm speaking from Melbourne, Australia. That's why I'm saying it's good morning. It's like a nice 4 a.m. here. Today we'll be speaking about the path forward and navigating HR complexities with confidence. So I invite everyone in the audience to be present in the conversation, just as much as our speakers. If you can drop your opinions, your ideas, your experiences in the chat. and that can help us all work together. So I'll invite the panelists to join the panel now. Thank you. Hey, good morning, everybody. And not sure where everyone's from, but I'm sure it's not Australia at 4 a.m. So just to start the panel, if we just can go around to each panelist, introduce yourself, describe your current role, and maybe add in a little challenge that you've faced recently that will help ground the conversation today. So we'll just go around clockwise. So Deborah.
Good morning. Deborah Maynard calling in from Vancouver, British Columbia on the unceded territory of the Katzie First Nation. I am the CHRO of Coast Mental Health. We're a mental health organization running everything from supporting drop-in centers to housing to addiction and support across 54 locations. The complexity, one of the more recent complexities is that we had fairly significant changes in our CEO. He left after 38 years, and then we had a number of new management teams. So that's one of the big complexities that, there's all sorts of other ones, but for an organization like ours, that's a fairly huge change. So I'm looking forward to this conversation this morning, and welcome to everybody from wherever you're calling in from.
Thanks, Deborah. Morning, Jason.
Hey, good morning, Rod, from the future, Rod. You're Saturday, and the rest of us are still on Friday. So
yes.
But Jason Rosoli from New Jersey, USA, and I've been in HR for probably about 25 years now, practicing at all disciplines of HR. Most recently, head of HR for Sears Holdings, Transform Co., Sears Home Services. And some of the things that I've recognized over as complexities recently is the balance of work life, right? So employees struggles to give a 100% commitment to their job while also giving at the same time 100% commitment to their personal lives and their families. So that balance has caused a lot of struggle within interpersonal struggles for people. And us as an HR profession, we're making sure that we have policies that are supportive of that, but also things that we can do to encourage people within themselves to gain confidence in themselves, not as just a professional, but on a personal level, gain confidence. So and be transformative. So those are some of the things that I've been noticing, of course, and also trying to practice myself.
Thanks, Jason. Francisco.
Hello. I love, again, talking to the past or the future and just looking at how funny that is. And sorry for you being at 4 a.m., but we really appreciate your service to us. So thank you. Thank you, Rod. So I'm calling you from Houston, Texas. And I have been, as Jason, a practitioner of the people and culture discipline for a couple decades and change. And right now I'm supporting a company called Share Community Development Corporation as CHRO. And what we do is we democratize access for real estate investment, which is super interesting. So we're going to build multiple multifamily communities with precast concrete. So our intention is to do hyper fast construction. So it's super interesting. What's happening is we're facing multiple HR complexities at the same time because we're very new as a company and we have a lot of ambition. And we want to do a lot of big things very quickly. So how do you help leaders balance out big thinking versus the short-term details that you need to get that going? So how do you balance infrastructure spend versus Excel? All of those things, organizational design versus just hire, blah, 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 blah. So it's just a little bit of all of the above happening at the same time. I love it because I'm a builder by nature. So definitely looking forward to sharing with you all some ideas on this.
And last but not least.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Gianna Kirkpatrick. I'm in the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas area. So love that you're in Houston, Paco. I am the director of HR for Prime Controls. So we are a large, one of the largest privately owned systems integrators. So making sure all of our clients' machinery talks to one another. It's something I'm learning. I'm relatively new to the team, started with the company back in October. And one of the challenges I'm facing is HR really has been more of a silo here and just off and more doing, back office type of work. So now we're restructuring the way that our leaders are thinking about HR as more of a strategic business partner. So that's one of the challenges. And then also revamping our onboarding. Like we have a great orientation, but that's it. That's where it stops. So getting our leaders to think more on how do we develop our employees throughout their life cycle, especially throughout their first year. So thank you.
Thank you and welcome. So to start today, I thought let's just talk about there's so much complex change happening in the world, employment law, workplace regulations, all that sort of stuff. It's always evolving. So to be confident and provide your organization the best advice, what sort of resources or networks do you rely on yourself to keep abreast of that, so you're confident that you're providing the best input, the best support for your organization? Who wants to start us off with that meaty question?
I can jump in here. Thanks, Rod.
Jason.
And supporting an organization that's nationwide and international, I mean, yeah, it's challenging. So not only do you have local laws that are city municipality laws, especially when it comes to sick leave and things that we've seen with COVID, but then you have state by state laws, minimum wage laws, and then international laws to keep on top of. So it is challenging for sure. Being in the past experiences that I've had with my team, I do things myself, and then I lean on others. So some of the things that you could do yourself, directly as an HR practitioner, are to sign up to free newsletters and stuff like that are given out by several law firms that are out there. You can Google pretty much any major law firm and sign up to their monthly, weekly, or newsletters, and then you can filter them based on your industry or the types of news alerts that you want to be notified of. Believe me, you'll fill up your inboxes pretty quickly. I like that. And then some other things. Obviously, there's many, depending on if, I also do labor relations. So I sign up for the National Labor Relations Board within the United States to keep up to date on certain laws that are coming out related to unions, but also to maybe certain class action suits or decisions that were made. Same could be done with, Bureau of Labor Statistics within the United States or other governmental agencies. And then lastly, most companies do have outside counsel, right? So if you do have an outside counsel, that is something that your outside counsel should also be reviewing and providing you with updates. And then lastly, if you have a certain HR systems, there are many HR systems that also trigger these notifications to you or trigger these reminders to you, or even self-update when it comes to maybe things like minimum wage. They automatically update, so you don't even have to worry about it. And it's just a matter of notifying your employees of such. But there's lots of tools out there. As they like to say, work smart, not hard.
Thanks, Jason. Who else wants to?
I would like to follow up on that. So having worked in both established companies and kind of no infrastructure companies, I think there might be a good amount of our audience that may be on the no infrastructure or little infrastructure side. And I've been fascinated by the explosion of people tech that has happened over the past 2 or 3 years, where there's a lot of providers giving you a lot of tools, as Jason said, for free. Of course, you have to pay their either software as a service or whatever. But what I'm trying to say is, I know one of the complexities we have to face is how do you put together the right business case for leadership to understand that expense in reality is a significant investment. And that can come in, PEOs in the US or employee of record or whatever you want to call those, and or something in between. You don't necessarily need to go all the route of that expense. But there's now several providers that give you somewhere in between kind of HR consulting, legal consulting side that comes with some of their either, again, software as a service or other packages that you have. So a lot of that has to do with the strategy that you want to follow, given that particularly if you're a 1, 2, or 3 women or men shop in a smaller company, you may want to invest in some of those offerings because they actually do everything for you. And I can tell you, it's just very complex to catch up with everything. It's just very complex because you will probably drop at least 1 or 2 balls all the time because you either are not following the latest legislation somewhere. So I don't know. In my opinion, I try as much as I can to put together the right business case so that they understand what can happen if you don't do something right? Because a lot of the times, a lot of business leaders tend to be more on the, okay, let them sue me or things like that. So how do you balance out a little bit some of their proneness to risk by saying, okay, fair, but here's what can happen to you. That normally tends to allow them to have a more open dialogue with you because if they understand the consequence, right?
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Rod, I'll just add a couple things. For loan practitioners, up here, we actually set up a loan practitioner group where people can join in and have their own support network. We have a labor relations group, and then we also started, because we're a nonprofit and things are different, we actually started a nonprofit roundtable. So if there's not resources out there, you can be the one to sort of generate that resource and set it up and really learn from each other and support each other, because I think there's so many great HR professionals out there that just don't know where to start. So set up a table and have a roundtable and meet, and even if it's virtually, it's just a great way to continue to understand what's going on. And I try to take a course quite regularly, whether or not it's through some of the universities or from some of the free resources that are available. I mean, there's just so much out there that's free that can keep you engaged and understanding what's going on. And then, to be honest, I read LinkedIn, and they've got lots of great little articles that are really quick and they're quick hits. And you can find almost anything and really then go research. And I subscribe to a business book summary, so it gives me a business book summary every month, and I can read that or listen to that in 2 books and go read the book if I want, but at least I get the overview and it just gives me that ability to sort of pick and choose what I want to delve more deep into.
That sounds great. What about, I'll put a plug, what about Hacking HR? You can come to these sessions.
Exactly. I was going to add that as well. Hacking HR. Prior to joining Prime Controls, I was primarily just an HR team of 1. So SHRM was my best friend. I didn't know where else to go. I was like, oh, okay. There's a lot of great resources on here. They host a lot of great webinars as well. And, with those webinar speakers, adding them on LinkedIn or following them to see what resources they have out there. And there's just so much information on LinkedIn sometimes that it's hard to digest a little bit. So making sure, those various sources actually match what they're saying. And then joining other networking professionals. There's a group I've joined called HR Advisory, which it's just great. And other HR professionals you can talk to on Slack. Don't even have to hop on a Teams call sometimes. It's and leaning on my team now too. If I'm not sure about an answer, hey, there's some other professionals out there with years more of experience than I have that can help me out here.
Can I double dip for 1 second?
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry, Rod, for breaking the rules here. But I remember there's one specific thing that we haven't talked about, but I'm sure it's going to pop out, which is, of course, the chatbots. We have to be mindful, though, of ChatGPT or whatever, because I posted several things where you asked it something and it's totally wrong, so you have to always double check. Having said that, there's one that not a lot of people talk about, which is POE, P-O-E. So check it out. And what it does that I really like is it ingests documents. You send them a full PDF of 45 pages and say, draft a summary of this, and it does it for you. So it's fascinating, particularly when all these things are laws and all those legal documents that you get busy by just reading the first page. That thing does it for you. So just FYI, there's now quite a few AIs out there that, of course, you always have to double check that it's not hallucinating. But try Poe in particular. It's super interesting what it does, particularly on the ingestion of document side.
That's really interesting. So I think one thing I heard in a number of the answers there was about leveraging technology. So maybe I'll ask a follow-up question with that. So how else, I guess, does technology transform your approach to HR decision-making, operational efficiency, particularly maybe, I don't think we mentioned much about data analytics. Like data analytics and getting the right information is really key to managing people as well. So maybe just expanding on the technology, can you just share an example, maybe specific, that's had an impact, for you in your environment? Taking that a bit further.
I'll go first this time. So a lot of your HRS systems offer, a data insights or analytic piece. And it's interesting to me because prior to joining Prime Controls, they'd never really leveraged this piece of data. And I was sitting down with our COO, and I was like, "Yeah, our turnover rate was kind of high." And he's like, "Oh, what was it? 18%, which is not a great number." And then diving down a little bit deeper into that data, I was like, out of those, 124 terms we had within the last year, 69 of them were, employee self-led, and 42% of that was within their first year. So there's, it leads you into a lot of great data points, but it's where you go from there. What are some of the solutions that we can come up with to fix that problem? And, to me, okay, ring a ding ding, onboarding is, hey, what are we doing for our teams? How are we supporting employees throughout their first year? But there's a lot of other great sites out there as well that can help you with that data piece.
Maybe I'll add a little bit about that too, because we actually send out surveys to new hires after 1 month, 3 months, and then a year to get feedback, and then summarize that and work with the managers to, try to improve things. The other thing is that actually all of my team has a metric based on metrics based on their performance plans, and on a weekly basis they report on it. And then that way it's top of mind around trends, and they sort of look and go, "Oh, why did that all of a sudden change?" So it takes them less than 5 minutes. It's a little chat that we do. Everybody updates their metrics and just talks a little bit about, if there's anything that they've noticed. So then we get a really quick sort of review before it actually goes to my CEO or my board. So, everybody's on top of it. And I think that has, been really valuable for people to understand sort of the, where things, what's driving some of the issues that we might have. So those are the other things that I think, adding surveys and, really having your team have their own metrics and owning them.
That's really good. Anything else? Jason?
Yeah, from an ATS standpoint and recruiting, there's been some huge headways over the last several years. Again, using chatbots and to collect information. I mean, heck, I used this company called one recently called Paradox. I'm sure, but most of you have heard of Paradox, but it's a newer one that a lot of companies are coming up with. And it literally, it does the screen, it collects the information, schedules the interview right into your calendar. So it does all the pre-screening. Obviously syndicates out. So that's one. To what Deborah mentioned, that there's lots of surveying that you can do within companies to primarily help out, like Gianna said, retention, and also to help out on the front side with attracting employees. But I think that the big thing with some of this information and technology is there's no one answer, right? So if a Workday, I'm sorry, but it's a great tool, but you can't just be reliant solely on one strict system. You have to look at a variety of systems. You have to have a variety of technology to help support what you're trying to achieve. I've used that in my last roles, that, you know, a variety of feedback tools throughout the entire employee life cycle. And then what we did is we went to another company and input them into a predictive modeling tool to try and predict where turnover was going to happen based on past results, employee performance, tenure, or you know, where they lived, and all that stuff. So again, the key to an HR is not being reactive, but to try and be predictive and proactive. So you know, continue to utilize the different technologies out there to try and move into that predictive and future state, and that's where you can really change the mapping and the framework of your organization.
Thanks, Jason.
Jason, I have not heard about Paradox, so I love it. I'm learning all the time here. To be honest, I've been doing, you know, before this, I was doing consulting for small companies on their HR tech stack, and I was just overwhelmed. There's too many. That's great, but it's a lot of different things, so it's very hard to catch up. Having said that, you know, to answer your very specific question, Rod, one of the things that I really like that is now starting to get integrated into a lot of different HR tools is compensation insights. And what I'm getting into is, I mean, it's ADP and several others, but they connect into for example, the U.S. Labor Statistics Bureau or whatever that is, and or other databases. Some of these vendors actually, I think ADP and a couple others, they allow you to anonymize their data, and you can look at, you know, I don't know, data from 100 million people or 80 million people that are on their systems or whatever that is. And then they tell you, okay, for this job category, this is the average pay that you have within this industry and within this subset of that industry. I mean, I tell people that are in HR right now, you know, for all of us old people, starting with me, you know, 20 years ago, you only had not even Excel almost, and you had to just call people. I mean, that's horrible. You didn't know anything, and the only thing that you had was just instinct. Now you have the power of data in front of you. So the difficult thing, you know, like with ChatGPT or anything of those things, the prompt engineering thing with us is how do you use that data to produce actionable and understandable insights for your business people. That's one of our biggest challenges, which is we can become too functionalist, and we're like, oh, you know, we geek out with these things. The business leader looks at you and is like, what am I going to do with this? You know, so how do we convert that into actionable business insights? That's one of the bigger challenges.
And I think to your point, that's where confidence comes in as well, right? Is being able to confidently present the data from a standpoint of, you know, knowledge, but also proposed actions, because your data will never get put to the test if the leaders don't believe in you with confidence, right? And by the way, Paco, Waco is the company's located in Waco, and between you and Gianna is where I've done some consulting with Paradox. So there you go. Right.
Now, I really like that in a number of those answers, you talked about employee engagement and retention. At my company, we just completed our sort of annual engagement survey, and we're at the point now we've got the results back. So I'm just wondering, when companies complete these sort of surveys, what's the best way to get the management, the employees? Then what's some best practice to really learn from that information? What sort of steps would you recommend to help leverage that and boost retention, boost engagement, having got good information back?
Well, let me jump in here. You know, you got to use relevantly real data. So what I mean by that is, if you're doing a quarterly survey or an annual survey, the data is too old by the time you get the results. Honestly, I mean, it's 6 to 8 weeks by the time you get your results and you start to analyze them. It's too old. You have to get to the standpoint of looking and breaking down your data into smaller chunks, more frequent. Again, last employer, I did daily surveys. And everyone's like, "What the heck? Are you crazy?" No, seriously, it was all it was an up, a thumbs up, or a thumbs down. I had almost a 90% participation rate on a daily basis from the employee population, whereby they could also say what went good on that day or what went bad. And you know the wealth of data we got out of that by people every single day, putting that, we could see days of the week, we could see, was there a call out, we could start connecting all the dots just based on a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And if they wanted to tell us why it was a good or a bad day, and just extract it and crunch it and crunch every day, crunch the data. And then you could start trending the data. You do a spot in time that who knows what was going on? Maybe that person their wife broke their foot that the day before. Then they have that data is all based upon that employees, what happened at home, or they had a bad conversation with their supervisor the day before. All other 364 days were great, but that one day before it was they had a bad day, and that skews your data. So again, I'm not trying to knock census surveys. They're good, but going back to my prior point, you have to have many different feedback tools, many different forums for them to give you that feedback, so that way you can collect that information that's necessary. So but again, going back to the point, is that's where you start getting into this predictive stuff, this future understanding of it, not just what happened in the past. So I'm not sure if that really answered your question, Rob, but
no, it does. I think that was really good. That's good suggestions there. I like that.
Well, that's so interesting to me, because I would feel like employees would get almost survey fatigue. So it's great to hear that you had 90% participation rate. My past places of employment have done surveys more on a quarterly or annual basis. So it is looking back in the past and being reactive to a lot of what their employees were saying. But for me, the best way is, okay, I'm going to summarize this data for our leadership team and then come up with solutions from there on how can we address and fix these problems. Here at, this new role for mine, I'm like, okay, let's get 30, 60, 90-day feedback from our employees. And we're actually doing kind of teams or face-to-face conversations instead of the surveys, so we can get some more real-life, genuine data and, drive deeper answers and responses from our employees, and meeting as a team on a weekly basis and going from there on how we can address some of the issues that we're hearing. Surveys are great for a lot of things, especially to meet when you can't meet with an employee in person because they're on a job site, or to get real-time quick data. But some of these real personal conversations that you can have with employees can also drive out some deeper information than just yes or no, I like my manager, I don't like them. So yeah.
Interesting.
I had so I worked for Amazon for almost 4 years, and they did have a daily survey that they sent out. I think they still have it. They might have been modifying it, but I experienced that too, and it's fascinating because they did go on a just couple of questions a day, right? So to try to not overwhelm people, and of course you had the typical engineer that was extremely skeptical and paranoid and thought that Big Brother was watching and all those things, and they also hacked the system. So anyways, all of those things, and that's just what happens. So I agree with both of you. What is fascinating is I've experienced 3 different tools in what they call insights or nudges or whatever that is, where apparently AI ingests the data that comes in either through signals or through text or a combination of both. And probably you're seeing that I'm still a little bit skeptical on the quality of those insights and nudges, because I think all of these models are very new. And if you get a little bit into the geeky territory of how machine learning works and all those things, they're starting to feed the models. So the models are going to get very smart in the longer term. But for now, you just have to balance out data with reality. And that's why I really like what you said, Yana. Now, when you are managing a very dispersed workforce or a very complex set of different things. That's where you have to marry the two. But I think I really enjoyed seeing how some of these tools, using the POE analogy I used a little bit earlier, a lot of us have done this 2 million times, where you have to go and look at all of the comments of a survey, and you have to manually detect each one of the ones, or flag or whatever, the ones that, and try to come up with your themes. It takes forever for us to do those things, particularly when it becomes a larger population. Those are some of the edge cases where, or use cases, where technology is starting to get very, very smart, and it's starting to become, it actually does produce a very decent, if not actually quite good, summary of some of those, qualitative information that employees give. But at the end of the day, I go back to practicity. I think, or practicality, or whatever you want to call that, being practical. One of the bigger problems we have with any of these things is the say-do ratio, which means you do it once a year, twice a year, whatever, or daily. If people don't see their leaders actually caring and taking real action on some of these things, it creates a negative cycle, because the average employee is like, yeah, whatever, right? So you have to balance out good intention and magical thinking, and saying, oh yeah, we're gonna, on romantic thinking, with practical thinking, by saying, okay, we want to do it daily. Congratulations. Here are the things you have to commit with me, so we go there, right? And that's where I think those type of decision-making roadmaps allow you to get to a much more practical stance, which will allow you to use technology the right way, but also to hold leaders accountable for whatever they want to achieve. So always on their commit and over deliver. So under promise, and over deliver. So maybe you start with the smaller subset of things that you can do, even though you may have a super capable technology. And then if people are actually doing it, okay, then you can go up and increase. So yeah, and again, I think there's so many tools out there. I cannot count them anymore. So just pick one, I guess,
Now, I like one thing that you said there, and I'll link it to some of the comment I can see in the comments, about, okay, we collect all this data, do leaders actually invest in doing something about it? And I can see a comment in there about data league focus groups to help get more insight, which sounds really quite interesting. So I'm just wondering, has anyone experienced sort of using that approach? So you've got all this data. What do you do with it to show that you've collected the data, that you're actually listening? How do you best reflect that back to the employees to make a better work environment?
Let me jump in on that. Well, first off, going back to my last comment, we definitely did not use daily surveys as the only survey tool. Absolutely, to Gianna and Paco's point, we used census surveys still. We used new hire orientation surveys. We used exit interview surveys. We did use stay interview survey information. So we did still do all the other traditional surveys. But to get to your point, Rod, how do we utilize the data? How do we give the feedback to employees? It's unremarkably important, right? If you're collecting data, if someone is participating in the survey, of course it's human nature. You want to know the results, right? You want to know where did your answer line up as opposed to everybody else's answer. So you have to give the results, but you can't just give the results. You got to say, what are the actions? Like you have to cheer yourselves on for what's going well and create action plans for what isn't going well and what you're going to do about it. So it's vitally important to give that data, give those results back to folks, but also support it with what you're going to do to change those poor results that you have. So it's important. And yes, to your point of data-led focus groups, some focus groups are executive level when it comes to policy changes or nationwide compensation or benefits changes. Some of them are focus groups that are on a local level when it comes to management of others, training, and tool allocation, or locally specific things that are going on. Again, I supported Puerto Rico, so the way we had handled a focus group in Puerto Rico might be specific to Hurricane Maria when it went through there and destroyed the island, and things that we're doing to help support them. Someone in Minnesota, they care about Puerto Rico, but that doesn't really affect them. So again, there's things that you have to do from a local, to have focus groups that are both different levels of the organization when it comes to those different answers.
Thanks, Jason. Anyone else want to add to that?
I can just add, one of the things we also do with our data from surveys is that we actually present it through Zoom in the new breakout rooms to get the feedback from employees at the time when they're hearing the results. And that's actually been very effective in getting them to say what surprised you, what would you change, what are some action items? And that allows us to start the first consolidation and let people know that we're listening and having them explain some of the results, because as we know, leaders all too often say, well, what does that really mean? What does that question mean? But, you might have, 500 people who interpret that question differently. So giving them a little bit of context setting and being able to present that back to the employees and really show at that time that you're interested in their feedback. It's actually been really, I was surprised how effective the breakout rooms have been to be able to do that and to gain that sort of insight.
Right. That sounds good. Thanks, Deborah. Anything else before we move on?
Yeah, I totally disregarded the fact of roundtables, right? So having employees give feedback themselves, but also come up with the solutions themselves to those problems. So, buy-in from the employee population via roundtables is hugely important that I missed off. Sorry, Paco, I think we were about to talk though.
No, that makes total sense. Let me add a little bit something relatively controversial as well. I love controversy sometimes. Particularly when you are in a smaller people organization, a lot of people are like, oh my God, I'm my own, et cetera, et cetera. Are we? So the big point here is, and I learned that through one of probably my first boss. She really taught me by saying, hey, if you work with individuals across the organization in other areas to be your allies and partners in your programs, you will scale yourself. And it's difficult, right? Because we don't want to let go, right? It's a little bit of that thing of, am I adding value or not, et cetera, et cetera. So we want to own all of these culture things. So what I'm trying to get into is some of these tools allow us to scale ourselves, particularly if we train people leaders to be our allies on this. What I'm getting into is, there's this concept of managers should manage. And one of the things that they should do, if you give them the right tools and infrastructure and mental models, they should be able to replicate what you do 100x. So it's a little bit of the balance between us creating and putting a lot of energy into the infrastructure, the process, and how things should be done, and then let it flow. Yes, of course, we can still get in, as Jason said, there's specifically certain topics where it's much better for us to be there for a million reasons, from compliance risk, culture preservation, whatever that is. But there's quite a few things that if we let go a little bit, as long as we provide the right guardrails and technology, that can really scale us up. And I'll be the first to say that I keep being an offender against my own rule because I really want to keep control of everything. I just can't. So how do you balance those things out is definitely one of the key mental models that I've learned the hard way, particularly when you don't have a lot of resources.
Mm-hmm. All done on that question? Now, picking the word balance. I think we heard balance. It might have been in Jason's at the start. We heard balance just then as well. So I'm just curious then, maybe bringing in balance. So how balancing the organization versus employee needs. There's been plenty of periods of uncertainty in the last few years. So what's some ideas about how we ensure the organization needs are aligned and support the employees' well-being and their career aspirations? So really, out of that whole survey bit, an element can be around uncertainty. How do we get that alignment? How do we get confidence? So part of the title of this panel was confidence. So who wants to have a go at that sort of question?
Sure, Rod, I'll take it. I think, it's it's an interesting question. And, when I think about balance and we talk about balance, balance may be that we're leaning in the employee side for a period of time, and then sometimes we're leading on the organizational side. And I think, you have to recognize as an HR professional sort of the complexities of the environment you're dealing with and what you may need to do more of. I mean, COVID was a prime example, right? I mean, you needed to, really focus in on the employees in order to for the organization to be successful. So, and that may, it stretched a lot of employers beyond what they're comfortable with and what they're beyond what they're comfortable doing. I mean, remote work, right? I mean, that's a prime one. I mean, before COVID, yes, we had it, but we didn't have it wholesale, and people weren't, sort of working outside purview. So I think, for me, it's around understanding the environment you're in, looking and checking into what you might need. And sometimes those needs mean balance is different things at different times. And I don't know if I answered your question, but to me, it's really understanding the complexities of where you're at. And I think that's what a good HR professional does is look at that. And balance isn't like it's 50-50. Balance could be 80-20 and then 20-90, or depending on the period.
No, that was a really good answer, I think.
Deborah, you hit the nail on the head right there. It's really, taking a look at your employee makeup and environment, and, how your leadership team wants to interact with, employees as well as a whole. I came from the tech industry primarily, and that was a very, very different environment than people who are working on, job site and construction sites day in and day out. So it's complex for me as a professional to wrap my head around what's important to this employee group versus, other, our office workers, our accounting team, and versus our engineers who might be remote. So there's so many different kind of hierarchies in any organization. And for just the confidence piece for me, I'm very young in my career, and I know I was put into a role where I'm trying to lead up in our HR group, and I'm still learning a lot myself. And so it is, all of these, resources, and asking leadership and asking employees both, what would they like to see from the organization? What support do you need from HR? What support do you need from leadership or from each other? And, taking that feedback and, making a game plan from there.
Thanks.
I love that, Deanna. I think we definitely need to have a chat after this, because I think we share some of those movements across industries and the monumental difference of some of this, some of the problems that some of the entitled tech workers have versus the day-to-day hourly individuals. So that's fascinating. One of the other things that I also like to add a little bit controversy on, and I'm going to write a LinkedIn post on this too. I'm in the middle of that. So you're all helping me on this. The romantic side of HR and wanting to save the world and wanting to be the superhero of the culture and the defender versus the practical and realistic side of the business reality. How do you balance those two things, which is very complicated? So going back to what you were saying, how do you find that practical approach? Sometimes, I've been a romantic a lot of times in my career, and I've suffered when I go and I sometimes have criticized leaders for behaving in certain ways. Call it work-life balance, call it work ethics, call it whatever you want. And, without not really taking a step back and detecting my biases and understanding their side of the equation. So what ends up happening when you do something like that, it becomes extremely, you bump head to head, and sometimes you get to nothing, and both sides get very frustrated. And quite a lot of times the business just does whatever the hell they want because they're the business, right? So how do you balance that out where you want to be a good advocate, still present your point of view, not being shying away, but also understanding a little bit more the business reality side of the house. So I think one of the tools that I've used to become more practical on how to deal with some of these complex things is really trying to do an exercise of putting myself in the shoes of the business leaders I'm partnering with. And that could be literally asking them to be a shadow of them. Some of them never want that because like, oh, HR's in the room, we can't speak. But some of them do. Some of them can also be by being much more curious and asking individuals much more about what are the top priorities in their mind and what keeps them up at night and what are the things that are really bothering them. And sometimes even presenting certain situations to them and saying, hey, and I said this before, but it's like, look, these are the 2 or 3 alternatives. I tell you, these are the pros and cons of them. My recommendation is this because of this, this, and this. What I understand that if you want to go this way, these are the prices that we're going to pay. So where do you want to be? And normally when I do that, I tend to get to a middle point. You know what I mean? Instead of always having them, because I own the truth and I am the single owner of the HR royalty and all that stuff, that it's a very entitled view, which by the way, unfortunately happens to a lot of us. It's much more like saying, hey, why can't I try to be a business leader, which happens to be very passionate about people and culture, not the other way around. So that has really helped me to evolve, and hopefully it helps a little bit.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. Now, I just noticed we've only got about 10 minutes to go. God, it's gone very quick, this conversation. It's been really fascinating to me. Now, and what was mentioned in there was different levels of time in HR and experience. So I'm curious then about the future. So some of us have been in HR in the industry for decades, some not as long. So looking ahead, based on your decades of experience or less, what do you think is the most significant challenge and opportunities for HR professionals in the next decade? So, you might have seen changes over the last few decades. What do you see is really going to be significant in the next decade?
Well,
Go ahead, Gianna. No,
sorry.
Go ahead.
Go.
Sorry. I'll start because it's I had limited, HR experience or just experience in the professional corporate world in general. I am, one of the older actually Gen Zers or Zillennials. So for me, it's trying to, balance what I'm reading in news stories. I read something about like 19% of Gen Zers bring their parents to job interviews, and that kind of blew my mind. I was like, really? Maybe there's a lack of confidence on the Gen Z side, and those employees coming up, and how can we kind of best support them when they're entering the workforce? So there's that piece, and they may need some extra support or hand-holding throughout their early careers. Remote work is definitely a topic that is going to continue being talked about. It's a hot topic. People have very different takes on it. Even though I am part of the younger generation, I love being in the office myself. I love seeing, our employees day to day and those face-to-face conversations. So people are going to be on the opposite ends of the spectrum, no matter what generation population they're in. AI, I mean, I'm not as the most passionate person about it, but it's definitely a tool that I'm using probably on a day-to-day basis. How can it help me in my career? I know one of my best friends, she works for American Airlines, and she said they blocked the system entirely, so they can't use AI at work, but it's being used by professionals, worldwide. So that is definitely, more of the future of the workplace.
Thank you. That's great.
I think go on, Debbie. You were going to go. Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. So, I think, for me, it's the expectations of employees going forward. I think, people want to bring their authentic and true self to the workplace, and that means that the expectations are different on employers and what that looks like. And then add in the rapidly evolving technology that we have and AI, and what does that look like? And then the world itself is changing so dramatically, and that that impacts us, even if you're not a global organization. So you start to look at that and the needs and the retirements and who's going to be leading the organization. I think there are just so many challenges for HR going forward. I thought, COVID was an interesting challenge, but I think that's going to be one of the least challenges as we go forward. I think there's so many other things coming at us so fast, and truly, when it looks at, this is probably the first time we've had 5 generations in the workplace. And those expectations are so different on how they perceive things, and and the right to disconnect and not move things hours and hours and hours outside of work, whereas people that maybe in their 50s and 60s might say, what do you mean you're not going to work past 4 o'clock? Or what do you mean you want to be done at 3 every day and be so I think add all those complexities in, HR is the place to work, and it's going to be the most exciting that it's ever been.
That's really good.
Yeah, and Gianna, Deborah, you guys hit it right on the head. Pretty much everything that is important you guys covered. I think really importantly is the expectations of future workers, right? The future generations don't have the expectation of that they're the amount of work that needs to get done in order to be supportive of real past expectations. I think it's going to be a real challenge. However, AI could be a real help to that, right? To be more efficient. But I also see that there's going to be, again, to Deborah's point about the globalization of work, there's going to be gaps. There's going to be major gaps. I mean, AI is going to disrupt the world in a huge way. There's going to be entire sectors that are put out of work. There's going to be huge changing of worker classifications, and then you have types of work. We were talking about blue collar workers versus white collar workers. There's going to be huge gaps when it comes to certain blue collar worker classes because of their level of expectation of what they want and their commitment to work. So and that's going to drive disruptions in the economy. And and again, I'm not trying to be this whole the world's going to crumble pessimist, but I'm trying to be a realist. We're going to have issues, right? We're going to have real issues, with future generations, if with the way their mindset when it comes to approaching work. So nothing that their struggles of the past, we'll get through it. We'll get through this, but it's going to be an evolving time that we have to be adapting to.
Yes, and I love your point. I was just seeing that one of the first groups of people that saw the future and acted quite quickly is the actors and movie producers and all that guild of people that did their strike, because they saw that AI was going to go and just sweep them by storm in terms of voice acting, in terms of a lot of different things. And they went out there very quickly and they put, some rules so that it doesn't go as fast as they wanted, probably as some people wanted. Well, I'm going to use that for us. I'll be absolutely honest. I am being non-entitled and very open that the way I did HR in the past, recruiting, compensation and benefits, almost all of it, even executive coaching and some of those things that we believe we're very special, are going to be significantly either substituted and or augmented, if you are a glass half full type of person, by AI. So, it is going to change radically how we do that, like with anybody else. But if we look at a little bit about, on our side, we have to be very open and try to be first adopters as fast as we can, because there are quite a few technologies that are moving way faster than we think, that are going to significantly shift the value, the real value of our function. So, instead of being entitled and just, being glass half empty, which is the de facto way that we can try to be more curious and see how can you learn how to properly use those tools to augment yourself instead of just letting AI consume your work, right? That would be one of the things that I would try to do on a daily basis.
Thank you. All right. So it looks like we're basically at the close of the conversation. But I'll ask one more very simple question. So just what's one key takeaway, call to action for our audience to consider? If we just want to go around the virtual room and just answer that. Who wants to go first?
Sure. I would say the key takeaway for me is, because we're talking about navigating HR complexities with confidence, is trust in yourself. You know more than you know. Get points of input and really, recognize that you do know what you're talking about. Because I think that's the one thing that people often, are, have the self, negativity that they bring forward, but really we do all know more than we actually think we know. So be confident, speak confident, it'll get you far.
Thanks, Deborah.
Absolutely. On that point, just be confident in what you know, and also just be aware of what you don't know and where you need to ask for help as well. That maybe other professionals are looking, like we talked about, looking on SHRM or other sites for data. But not being afraid to ask for help. That's something I've had to remember. Being younger in my career is just, okay, I don't know this, but I'm going to find out the answer, or maybe I'll ask somebody for that support if needed.
Thank you.
I didn't know if we were going counterclockwise, but I'll jump in.
It doesn't matter. It's all right. You can jump in.
So a couple things. I got to mention the 5 Ps. So my 5 Ps are proper preparation prevents poor performance, right? So be prepared with how you approach situations. Your preparation will give you confidence. The other thing I'll point out is give yourself daily little tasks that you're uncomfortable with, so that way you can overcome them. That will build confidence within yourselves, overcoming small little things on a daily basis. And last thing is detachment. So detachment is taking yourself out of situations and listening. Listen to what's being said before you speak, right? Formulate a response. Don't just react to a response. So and then the last thing I'll mention is be the person who you want to be in the future, not necessarily the person that you are in the present. And what I mean by that is, when you're listening, you're stepping back. Think about, okay, if this is the person that I want to be, how would that person answer that question? How would the future you answer that question? Not how are you thinking about it right now? And again, some of these require stepping back, like Gianna said, and saying, I'm not sure, let me look at it and I'll get back to you. But try and continually moving yourself forward as an individual from that perspective.
Thanks.
I mean,
last but not least,
I want to connect with you, Jason. You're a wealth of knowledge. I love it.
I'm open for consulting. I'm out of work still, so help out.
Yes, sir. let's get you going for sure. No, I mean, I just would add two more things. Number one, there's some fun chatter going on that if SHRM is outdated or not. That's a broader topic. Having said that, we have Hacking HR. So you are all here. You're already taking a good step in learning. It's free, for God's sake. And of course, if you want to go a little bit deeper, just pay whatever it is. It's better than having 2 Starbucks. I mean, you can do that. And also Enrique and team are putting together a very interesting academy and some more things, particularly kind of like certification side that I love. It's really selfless. It's really value add. And you all can get it from individuals that come from more of a practical side of the house, balancing it out with a theory. So it's always good to have the 2 sides. And the other one is just keep your mind open, as you will be surprised sometimes of the resources that you have inside your organization. As an example, here, first I was not very happy, and now I'm really using it. I think 5 people in the company I'm working for have run HR in the past. And actually several CFOs and CEOs. And yeah, sometimes I can get a little bit defensive on that. It's like, you are going to tell me how to do my job. Don't do that. Tell me, how have you done my job, and tell me your thoughts. And that way, just change a little bit, and you can get a lot of internal help without even understanding that you could get it from them. So just be curious. You will be surprised.
Well, thanks everyone, and I really loved all that advice and the whole conversation the last hour. But yeah, trust yourself, know what you need to learn, like know what you know and know what you don't know, like those bits, and then yeah, use things like Hacking HR preparation. So all those great bits of advice there from everybody. So thanks everyone. Look forward to joining you in future conversations. So thanks. Bye.
Fantastic job, Rod. Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Nice
Thank
to see
you.
you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye now.
Go back to sleep, Rod.
I will.